with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Thank you so much for rejoining us. I'm about to introduce my next guest and final guest for the day, but before we do, I just want to encourage all you Mavs listeners out there. I'm going to go ahead and guarantee a victory on Saturday. What do you say? What do you say, Fern? Is there a possibility with 30-point loss the other day? I still believe. I believe Dirk's going to have a hell of a game on Saturday and bring us back. And all due support for the Stars as well. Okay, thank you once again for rejoining us. We have our next guest here, and I'm excited to introduce a good friend of mine, Jaime Resendez, who is running for trustee. And I'm going to just go ahead and open it up to you, Jaime. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your show. But, I'm running for school board trustee in District 4, which includes most of Pleasant Grove, Balch Springs, and the Cedarville area. Yes, PG. But I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. I grew up in Pleasant Grove. Every school that I went to is in Pleasant Grove. Julius Dorsey, R.C. Buckner, E.B. Comstock, and I graduated from Skyline. But I grew up by Spruce High School. But before I graduated from Skyline, I had to come up with a plan to go to college.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up around people with degrees, but the ones I would see on TV were never broke. So I figured that would be a good route to try to take.
Yeah.
But since my parents didn't have any money, the plan I developed was to join the military.
Yeah.
I was 17 years old when I joined. I ended up serving a total of 8 years as an engineer, including a year in Iraq. And that's the experience that changed my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't in Iraq just handing out water.
Right.
I was on hundreds of convoys throughout Baghdad. People were dying on the same streets I was on. People were getting shrapnel ripping through their bodies on the same streets I was on the same days. It just wasn't me. So I came back, a 21-year-old war veteran with a totally different perspective on life. I still remember when I started going to Eastfield Community College, I remember sitting in class thinking, I'm in an air-conditioned classroom, taking notes and reading a book.
Yeah.
I said, I can do this. And that's when I became extremely focused on my studies. I began to read every single thing that was assigned. Lo and behold, I started making A's. So I graduated from Eastfield, transferred to UNT Dallas, and ultimately graduated from the University of Texas School of Law.
Yeah, that must have made you grow up real fast.
Yes,
heading
sir.
on over there, Jaime. Let's talk about you growing up. You mentioned the schools that you had attended. Brothers and sisters, family?
Yes, I have one brother. He's 1 year older than I am, and one sister who's 1 year younger than I am.
Okay.
So I'm the middle child.
Yeah, so they did it real quick. And
Yes. By the time my mother was 18, she had all three of us.
Yeah, I was talking to our other guest Isaac earlier about being a middle child. I'm a middle child, so I know what you've gone through.
Yes.
You got an older brother who can take you until you can take him.
Right.
But I had two older brothers, so that took me a little while to kind of get there. Your folks, you mentioned your folks, and you mentioned first generation.
Yes.
What did they do? You mentioned you guys didn't have a whole lot growing up. What did your folks do for a living, and what did that kind of look like?
Well, first of all, my parents they met here in Dallas.
Okay.
My dad is from Torreon, Coahuila, which is a city in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother's from an extremely rural area in Mexico. It's a rancho in San Luis.
Okay.
And what's interesting to me about that is when we were younger, me and my brother and my sister, we would spend the summers in Mexico. We would spend 1 month where my dad was from and one month where my mom is from.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we got a broad range of the Mexican culture in us. So when they came here at a young age, they met here. My dad worked construction for many years,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother worked at a warehouse where they made optical lenses for about 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Yes.
So really, I would imagine not much guidance in terms of college, educational attainment, specifically from your parents. Isaac mentioned earlier, same type of situation. His parents kind of realized, hey, look, this is your way out. Education is the opportunity. Did you kind of have that? Did you kind of have that role model, or what was it that kind of woke you up?
I think there's a difference between my experience and Isaac's. My parents came here with elementary level educations, and there was not a single day that they could help me with homework, growing up. I mean, they didn't know the language. I mean, they got educated in Mexico. So it was just basically a decision I made personally to pursue a college education. I mean, in my introduction, I'm serious. When I used to watch TV shows or movies, and I would see a doctor or a lawyer or engineer, they would always be, well off. Yeah. So that's something I took upon myself.
Yeah, people kind of, kid around about, influences and where you find them and movies and television. I'm a big proponent of kind of the human condition, and wherever you can find it and where it's all about and what it's all about. Movies for me have always had a big impact in terms of, finding role models and finding, the good and the bad and all that stuff. Specifically being an attorney, becoming an attorney. When did you kind of come to that realization, hey, this is what I want to do?
Right. Well, it happened later in life for me.
Okay.
When I was younger, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I joined the military, and I decided to continue getting an education because the military was paying for it. And for a while, I was strongly considering becoming a fireman.
Really?
It seemed like an interesting job.
Yeah.
The pay was decent. I'd be saving lives, so it seemed like a cool thing to do.
You would get on a poster?
Right.
I'm kidding, man.
Not at all. But what happened was when I transferred from Eastfield to UNT Dallas, I started hearing people talk about grad school and law school, and at that time, it's kind of embarrassing to say, I was in my mid-20s or early 20s, and I still didn't know how an attorney became an attorney. Right? But I did my research. Luckily, I grew up in the Google era, and so I started doing a lot of reading, and I realized that I had a good shot to get into a good law school.
Right.
So that's when I started studying for the LSAT and did well enough to get accepted into the University of Texas School of Law.
Okay. I mentioned earlier that I've known you for a little bit of time, and I've kind of seen you, kind of go through some things, go through some programs and other things. One of them, Latino Center for Leadership Development, which I think is just a wonderful organization that provides an opportunity for folks to kind of figure out the process, specifically not just Latinos, but the way it's kind of set up and comprised of. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, your experiences with it, and how it's kind of helped you kind of figure out where you're headed?
Sure. A lot of people ask me about the Latino Center for Leadership Development Academy, and I have nothing but good things to say about the academy. It's very high quality, not just the individuals running it, but if you look at take me out of the fellowship program, the academy, you got Harvard guys in there, you have NYU Law, Columbia Law, successful business owners. It's an amazing program, and I've learned a lot from it, not only about the demographic shifts within the Latino population, the challenges that go with that, but also the opportunities. And it's been extremely beneficial to what I'm doing now. I've learned a lot about campaigns, I've learned a lot about personal narrative, and just being able to put myself in a position to successfully serve in either an appointed or elected office.
Yeah. Jaime, you kind of mentioned your military experience, and you were not necessarily kiddingly, but you're kind of talking about, you came back and you're like, man, I'm sitting in the classroom with air conditioning and all these other things. But I would imagine that those few years in the military and seeing what you were seeing and doing what you were doing, first of all, thank you so much for your service and everybody else who served our country in such a way. But tell us a little bit about how, one, that could kind of aid you in terms of what you're doing and the representation of others as a trustee, and kind of how it made you kind of give a sense of where you were headed, kind of gave you a barometer of that.
Right. Well, in terms of how I think that experience can help me is not just the war experience, but being in the military, you gain a lot of leadership experience. Right. And for me, I was fortunate enough to become a squad leader and a platoon guide during what's called AIT, Advanced Individual Training, which is where you learn your job in the military. In that role, I was accountable for the actions of over 70 fellow trainees, the daily actions. And also, I was able to advance to, I was promoted to sergeant by the age of 21. This was when I was in Baghdad. And in that role, I had other soldiers under me. So, again, I learned a lot about leadership, protocol, and motivating other people.
How long were you in the military?
I was in for a total of 8 years.
8 years, so you had to re-up at some point?
No, I joined as a reservist initially, but I did end up serving a total of 2 years on active duty after September 11th. Okay, and came back, I think you had mentioned, and then started school then? Is that when you? Well, I joined the military, I came back from basic and AIT, and I enrolled at Eastfield.
Okay.
And at that time, I still didn't know how to study.
Right.
I was just going through the motions pretty much.
Right.
September 11 happened. I was deployed for a year, came back, and that's when I became extremely focused.
Okay. And you mentioned the University of Texas Law School.
Yes.
But when did you get there? How did you get there? And first of all, for folks who don't know, it's probably one of the finer institutions here in this country, quite honestly, but definitely in the state of Texas. Very competitive, very difficult to get in and kind of get through. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get there?
Right. Well, in terms of being accepted, when I was doing my research into law schools, I realized that a lot of law schools have a diversity initiative, right? So I knew my background was unique. I mean, I grew up in Pleasant Grove. A lot of my friends didn't graduate high school,
right, let
alone attend college, let alone graduate from college, let alone do well in college. So I knew I had that background in the zip code 75217, that's why I made it a point to study extremely hard for the LSAT. And going to law school at UT, I think I learned a lot about society, because I would always ask people at the law school, hey, did you take an LSAT prep course? And invariably the answer would be yes. And I know it boosted my LSAT score a lot, but the problem is a lot of poor people don't have the money to pay for those prep courses, right? And while I was there, I noticed, I didn't think it was a coincidence that there were only a handful of people at UT Law who come from working class households. The great majority, their parents are doctors, lawyers, judges. My classmates went to Harvard, Yale, Stanford. I don't think it's a coincidence. So.
Right. And graduated from law school and then started practicing, or have you been practicing? What do you kind of do?
What I did initially, I accepted a job, but I didn't even last a week there.
Oh, really?
I just didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Maybe reality hit me. I was used to being either a student or in the military or working different type of jobs. So I guess reality hit me when I was stuck in traffic each morning and each afternoon, and I'm thinking, is this how the rest of my life is going to be? And I just thought about it. I said, look, I'm from Dallas. I speak Spanish. I don't have any debt because the military paid for it. I'm going to start my own practice. And that's what I was doing for a year, until at one point I was looking for office space, and I was going to sign a lease, right? And then I decided to stop at one more building on 35 and 8th Street, and I didn't know who owned the building, but just so happened to be that Senator Royce West owns the building. And we met. He said he didn't have any office space for lease, but he contacted me a couple of days later and offered me a job, and I thought it was too great of an opportunity to pass up. So I've been there for the past year and a half.
Yeah. What have you been doing there? What do you primarily do as an attorney?
I do a little bit of civil, some criminal, and disability, but my favorite area of practice is juvenile delinquency cases. I get to deal with a lot of kids, a lot of DISD kids who are going through a tough time in their lives, and I get to share my story with them and encourage them to try to better their lives and get an education and read a lot. That's really what
And you have a child of your own, right?
Yes, I do. I have a 7-year-old biracial daughter who will be attending Solar Preparatory School for Girls this upcoming school year.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Let's talk about you as a candidate for trustee. First of all, what kind of got you the decision to go forward and actually run for trustee?
Right. Well, first of all, I didn't grow up too interested in politics. I never thought I would be a candidate for anything, right? But it just seems like my life has kind of pushed me in this direction, with the military background, with the law degree now, and then being from the area that I want to represent. But the opportunity kind of just happened. Part of it was, again, going back to the Latino Center for Leadership Development Academy. I was able to meet some of the right people, and then the opportunity was put before me, and I thought it was too good of an opportunity to pass up.
Okay. So being a trustee, what does that kind of mean to you? What is the essence of being a trustee, do you think?
Right. Well, as a trustee, of course, you have to balance the budget or make sure that money is being spent, tax dollars are being spent correctly, right? And of course, you set the policy for the district, you set the goals for the district and student achievement, and you hold the superintendent accountable.
Okay. And, superintendent, for lots of folks who may not have followed Dallas politics or DISD in particular, we've transitioned relatively recently from Mike Miles, who was our former superintendent, to Michael Hinojosa, who's our current superintendent and who had been our superintendent in the past. What kind of job do you think he's doing?
Well, for now, everyone knows Mike Miles brought a lot of forceful change to the district, a lot of new...
Former military guy.
Right. And I've been asked about that also. But you know, he forcefully challenged the status quo. He brought in new reforms that a lot of people didn't agree with, and his style was, you know, rub people the wrong way. And what I think that Michael Hinojosa has done now was smooth some of those things out. You know, there's a lot less tension within the schools and among the board.
Okay. And one of the big initiatives, and one that I think has been, you know, kind of an issue for lots of folks, the TEI, basically the evaluation of teachers and,
right.
and their, you know, their incentive to do a certain type of work and then kind of get paid accordingly.
Right.
Which, you know, for some, and certainly in private sectors, that would be an important incentive. You want to do well, you want to show well, and based on that, you want to be able to get paid for it.
Right.
You know, lots of people, especially teachers, I think, within the district, have had issue with its implementation. What do you think about that? What do you think? Is it good for DISD? Is it bad for DISD? And currently the way in which it's kind of playing itself out right now.
Right. Well, I don't think that TEI is perfect, right? But I do think that it's an improvement over the old system. You know,
Okay.
To me, PDOS was just not doing what it was supposed to do,
Okay.
right? Under PDOS, I mean, we were having 98% of teachers who were getting high marks, right?
Right.
But yet between 9 and 11% of our students are considered college ready.
Yeah.
So to me, there's a disconnect there, right? And under that system, there was one 45-minute observation by the principal and a self-evaluation.
Right.
So I think it's difficult for someone to say that, oh, I'm doing a terrible job, or I could be doing a lot better,
Okay.
right? So again, I don't think TEI is perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And I'd be open to having the conversation of ways to improve it. Because, I mean, I know we need teachers to be happy. We need to support them. And I think that that's what's key with TEI is we provide the necessary support so that teachers can meet the goals that we set for them.
I think it's a really important point. I know a lot of it. There was a back and forth support for it. You know, most organizations, teaching organizations, didn't like it because of the way it was implemented. And I think a big part of it, the big problem that they were having with it was student evaluations. You know, being under Miles, a big portion of what you know basically their salaries could be.
Right.
And we're talking about, you know, can be kids. Hey, look, did you like
Right.
your teacher?
Right.
That part of it, I think, can be tweaked. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I don't disagree with you. I mean, that is something I would be interested in looking at, because maybe when I was a kid and if I had a strict teacher who really wanted the best out of me, I might have not liked her methods, right? And I might have given her a bad evaluation.
Yeah.
So that is an area of the system that I would look into or try to look into or be interested in talking about in terms of improving.
It's funny, but some of the best teachers that I have, as I look back, were the hardest ones on you.
Exactly.
And at the time was like, I hate this person, I hate
Right.
this guy, I hate this gal. But you look back and say, hey, man, they taught you how to do what you needed to do to get done. So, yeah, you know, asking a student, you know, what do you think about your teacher? Well, you know, some of the better teachers can get overseen by that. All right, TII is a big one. I think charter schools. You know, I was talking to Isaac earlier about charter schools and what they're doing, and tell us a little your take on what they're. You know, are they good for the district? Are they good for choice? Are they good for parents and students? What do you think?
Right. Well, that's another question that I've been asked repeatedly throughout this campaign.
Yeah.
And the way I like to answer this by saying that I'm not a fan of charter schools.
Okay.
I'm a fan of good schools.
Okay.
Okay. And I do believe that charter schools have a role in our educational system. I mean, there are some good charter schools and some bad charter schools. We need to ensure that, I mean, if we have to shut down the bad ones, shut them down as quickly as possible, right? But overall, I mean, the goal, the purpose of charter schools initially was for them to serve as some type of incubator or, you know, an area we can learn from.
Okay.
And I think we should continue doing that. And when I look back on my personal life, if I wouldn't have gotten accepted into Skyline, my only option would be Spruce. And at that time, Spruce's graduation rate was in the 30s,
Okay.
which should be a crime in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been great if I wouldn't have gotten accepted into Skyline to have the opportunity to choose to go somewhere else, you know? Yeah. And so that's what I think. I think charter schools are important in terms of choice. But, you know, a lot of people talk about the fact that they're, quote unquote, taking students away from DISD. But I think as a trustee, if I were to be elected, my primary goal would be to provide the best educational opportunity so that students and parents would choose to come to our schools in DISD.
It's funny you say got accepted in the Skyline. I was coming when I when I finished 8th grade. I went to St. Thomas, private school, and then, hey, I don't want any more private schools. I've had enough of this. So I was going to try to go to Skyline. And at the time, you talk about dating yourself, they had the new computer cluster. Hey, you got a computer cluster. Hey, we'll go take computers, this new computer thing. And they told me that I had to wait the second semester to make the application because I applied too late. So I had to go to North Dallas High School. And, North Dallas has, historically been a rough school. And when I was going there, it was pretty rough. There was a lot of the problems that you see now. There's a lot less. We've had an opportunity to kind of go into some of the high schools, and I am just amazed that, you don't see, students running around. And man, when I was at North Dallas, it was like a free-for-all.
Right.
And it's hard. It's hard to get an education at that time. Right. It's hard to do some of those things.
And that's kind of how my experience was when I at my middle school. I mean, at Comstock, there was just a lot of racial tension. I mean, people were fighting all the time. We had, drugs, gangs, and all that going on, right? And that culture, I mean, it obviously follows the kids into the high schools, right? Spruce and Samuel. So my experience at Skyline was extremely beneficial in terms of my perspective because I was able to be around people from other parts of Dallas, people who went to magnet middle schools, people who had ambitions, and there was nothing wrong with trying to go to college, So that's something I learned and picked up when I was at Skyline.
I had an opportunity this morning to actually speak with a candidate for a trustee, and his focus was on discipline. I've heard this in the past. I was on the Mayor's Forum for Education, and a lot of the folks, quite honestly, some of the older members of the group, were about, hey, we need to, invoke discipline in schools. And I understand, I understand the need to, you've got one or two bad apples kind of ruining it for everybody within the classroom. I get that. But what about those one or two students who, maybe through some fault, but mainly not their fault, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're coming from a situation where they don't have the ability, just kind of throwing them away doesn't sit well for me. What do you think a responsibility of a trustee is to kind of look into policy that, how do we fix that? How do we kind of take out maybe some of the people who are just, kind of disrupting the classroom, but not throw them away?
Right. Well, it is a difficult situation, and that's one of the things that I studied even in law school and throughout my educational career, because I was always interested in the school-to-prison pipeline. Yeah. And one of the issues that, if I were to be elected as trustee, that we should look into is the disproportionate impact of disciplinary policies on minorities in general, but particularly African-American youth. Right? There's a lot of, young kids who are being suspended and kicked out of school. There has to be a better approach to that, and I'd be interested in finding out ways to improve that.
Yeah. Have you? I know you've been around the schools, a bit more as you're getting ready to run for trustee and other things. Have you seen that same kind of? It's different. I graduated in the 80s, which is before your time in terms of there. But what I really saw was it just a free for all. I don't see that when I go back to the schools as much. Are you seeing that? I've seen an improvement. I've seen. Right. How do you think? One, have things improved, and two, in terms of policy, what do you think about that? What do you think the responsibilities of the trustee are to kind of make sure that things are relatively running smoothly and we're not having as many disciplinary issues?
Right. Well, the first part of your question is I think I agree with you in terms of things being a lot better, because even from back in my time, I remember it just seemed like more of a free for all, right? Sure. And the schools I go into now, I guess you could say they're slightly more tame. But I think it's relative, because when I go visit a suburban school and speak to their students, it's a totally different atmosphere. I spoke at Spruce not too long ago, and as soon as I walked into the auditorium, I immediately knew that I had to revise my approach, and speak differently and be a little bit more real. Just be a little bit more real, right? And to let them know that I am from this area and that I'm different, right? Yeah. But you can still be yourself and still want more out of your life, and still be ambitious, and still be studious, and want to be knowledgeable, So that's what I see, and particularly in District 4, because although generally the demographics are very, very similar, there are some differences between, for example, Pleasant Grove and Seagoville, right? In Seagoville, I hear a lot of complaints, not necessarily about or only about discipline, but in terms of resources, a lack of resources. When I talk to a lot of people in the Spruce or Samuel areas, they talk more about disciplinary issues.
Right.
And I think in terms of being a trustee and setting policies, I think we need to make sure, look at all the current policy and see how we can improve it, right? Provide some ways for teachers to have some type of autonomy maybe, but just look at the overall process and see how we can improve it.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what DISD looks like and what we need to do to kind of take that into consideration. I think 75% of the student population is Latino. With that, you've got a lot of individuals who are Spanish-speaking primarily, especially coming in at those early levels. I want to talk to you a little bit about what that kind of means in terms of policy, perhaps on bilingual education, on some dual credit situation. Tell us a little bit about your take on bilingual education.
Right. I think it's a great way to try to, or it's one way that we can try to address the English as a second language learners,
Okay. Right?
Because, going back, I think the way I learned Spanish might have been through TV or something like that.
Okay.
I know it might sound like I watched a lot of TV, but that's not necessarily the case. And I remember going to pre-K and kindergarten and the teachers speaking Spanish, right? Most of our class was full of Hispanics. So I think those type of, like a dual language program, I think is beneficial. And that's one of the good things that we have going on in District 4. For Samuel High School, each elementary school in its feeder pattern offers a dual language program.
Okay.
So I think that that's something that could be beneficial.
Okay, maybe something we could implement across the board.
Exactly. Right.
And that'll be something. We're going to take a quick break, but that'll be something I really want to talk to you about, specifically the district that you'd be representing and how that kind of comes into play with the overall DISD and the commitment to all the students. So you guys please return back with us in about 3 minutes. This is Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo, and our special guest, Jaime Resendez. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. Please rejoin us.
Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Thank you so much for rejoining us. As she just mentioned, this is Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo, and our special guest, Jaime Resendez, who is running for trustee in DISD. Jaime, there have been a lot back and forth within the district for people who don't really know. Lots of infighting among trustees. There's kind of for me, at the very least, from an outsider kind of looking in, I think that trustees have an obligation kind of across the board to look out for all of DISD, but then the way we have it set up is those particular trustees are looking for their district, their area.
Right.
Tell me what you think the kind of the responsibilities of a trustee are in terms of the obligations to the students in DISD.
Right. Well, I think you touched on it perfectly. To me, as a trustee, you need to take into account the entire district, not just the district you represent, right? Yes, of course, you need to communicate with the community in the particular district you represent, find out what their needs are, but at the end of the day, you do have to take into account what the needs of the entire district are.
Yeah, I think our whole democracy is kind of predicated on that. You got to be able to get people to vote you in,
right,
and the people in your district are the ones voting for you. But yeah, we have an obligation, I think, across the board to make sure that we're taking care of all the students.
Right. So one of the things that I would be interested in doing if I'm elected is not only talking to the other trustees, but maybe potentially visiting their districts, visiting the schools, seeing what they have going on, so that I would not only understand the trustees' positions, but also their interests.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think there needs to be a lot more of that. There needs to be a lot more of that consensus building within, and less infighting in terms of looking at your own particular district so much. I think we get a lot of that in the paper. We see a lot of the fighting.
Right.
We go to the board meetings and we see that there's a lot of disagreement and other things. So people can kind of get a negative picture of the district. But there's a whole lot of good things going on in the district as well.
Right.
From your perspective and some of the things that you've been looking at over the last few months, months and gearing up for a run at trustee. Tell us some of the good things that you would kind of highlight about DISD.
Right. Well, there's a lot of good things that are going on right now in DISD. One of them that I really like is the development of these specialty schools and different choice schools. Like I said, my daughter will be attending one of them, Solar Preparatory School for Girls,
which is incredible.
Yes, it'll be for STEAM focused school. Science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. And my daughter's extremely excited about that.
Yeah.
Another thing that I like about that school is that the school is being intentional about mixing people's economic backgrounds, right? 50% will be from working class community. The other 50% will be from a higher income families.
Right.
So I'm really excited about that. But another thing that's going on in the district that I really like is the expansion of the schools within a schools program. And these provide neighborhood choices whose admissions are not competitively based. These early college programs. District 4, as a matter of fact, is the only district in which each high school has an early college program. So that's something that I'd be interested in trying to find ways to expand across the district. And I guess the last thing, or a very important thing that was recently passed, is the expansion of full-day pre-K, which I'm a strong advocate for early childhood education. I think everyone knows the importance of it, but it's kind of shocking to me that it took this long for us or the district to actually focus this much attention on early childhood education.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Pre-K, I know for some people, of course, you're thinking pre-K is right before kindergarten, I would guess. You're probably talking about mainly 4-year-olds who are looking at it. There's talk of the need to even reach out to 3-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-olds.
Right.
And that can be kind of a difficult overall deal in terms of how do you get these 3 or 4-year-olds to school. Transportation issues, especially with working class families, more of a situation where they're going to need more careful attention in terms of just overall, hey, take care of my kid, make sure it doesn't get into this or get into that, along with a curriculum that it kind of gives them an opportunity. Do you think we're prepared for that? Do you think we're prepared for kind of addressing those issues as early as 3 years old? Or do you think the way we have it in terms of a 4-year deal and the way it's kind of running, is there any way to kind of, fix it up a little bit?
Well, I like the idea of including the 3-year-olds into the mix, right? And the district has identified roughly 30,000 kids who are pre-K eligible, yet for various reasons don't have access to universal pre-K. But in terms of the district being able to provide the facilities, I mean, is the money there? That's the big question, right? We see the need, 30,000 plus students. Now, do we have the funds? And from the last time I checked, I believe it's the district needs an additional $60 million to fund universal pre-K. So we need to come up with ways as trustees to try to find ways to come up with the money, or cut things in the budget to free up some money and direct it towards early childhood education.
I know it's a difficult question sitting here, not looking at a finance budget or any other thing. Where do you think we could pull those monies from? Right.
Yeah, it is difficult to answer it as someone who's not a trustee, but I know there are, one thing we could look into is maybe our facilities and our buildings, are they being underutilized? I mean, can we consolidate some departments, and if it be in our best interest or more financially feasible to sell some buildings, then that might be an option.
Yeah, there's quite a few that were closed down relatively recently and are kind of sitting there. They could provide added income to the district in terms of what it is we're looking at. Do you think we move too slowly? Do you think the district moves too slowly in kind of adapting to those changing needs? Because they're changing all the time. The makeup of our schools, they're looking different. The people are moving away, people are moving in. So do you think we move quickly enough to kind of address those issues?
Right. Well, it's hard to say. Again, as someone who's not a trustee, I don't know all the information. I don't have it all in front of me. I haven't had the opportunity to look at things. But I mean, that's one of the things I would do as a trustee is I want information as soon as possible.
Right.
Because we can't afford to wait. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, these kids are in school now, and we need to make sure we provide the highest quality education as soon as possible.
Okay. You mentioned your daughter's going to an all-female school. I've heard a lot of good things about that. tell us some of the things. Would that be something that you would look to continue? Irma Rangel School is one of the highlights of the district in terms of the productivity of the students, and tell me why you think that might work. Why does it work more so than maybe other types of schools?
Right. Well, I think it does have the potential to be extremely beneficial. I mean, when you remove a lot of distractions, right? I mean, you're not worried about trying to look a certain way or trying to impress any particular gender, right? Okay. And another thing that's happening in District 4 is that the two middle schools, Balch Springs Middle School and Florence Middle School, there will be single gender schools also. Right. Florence will be all boys, and Balch Springs will be all girls. And it's the same concept, right? Just removing as many distractions as possible, increasing students' confidence, and hopefully we have better student outcomes.
Yeah, I talked earlier with our guest Isaac Foss about Townview, which luckily my daughter, and I'm dating myself again, who graduated a few years back from Townview, it's been ranked number 1 in the country, right, the last 5 years, and I think even beyond that. What steps, why can't we, in your opinion, why can't we emulate that across the district? Why can't we, increase that opportunity, or can we? And what does it kind of look like from a trustee's perspective? How do we do that?
Right. I think one of the reasons that it's difficult to, I guess, provide that type of quality education systematically is because, for example, the TAG program at Townview, which is ranked number 1 in the nation, is basically pulling the most, I would assume, the most talented students in the district, right? Okay. And but what we can try to do in order to provide high quality education throughout the district, I think it's a holistic approach. I mean, okay, it's going to have to. It takes not only the trustees, not only superintendent, not only the parents. Particularly the parents, though, we need to make sure that they're more involved, but the business community, and the community in general. One thing we lack, I think, in our district is more mentors, more people pushing reading at an early age, for example. Yeah. So, again, I think it's a holistic approach in terms of providing the high-quality education.
What do you think about it? Because I wholeheartedly believe in that, in getting kids to elevate what it is they're thinking with respect to their parents. And it's not always easy to do when you have a high poverty rate, which we do have. I mean, DISD, it's about 85% who qualify for reduced lunches and other things. So that is something that we need to deal with, and it's difficult to have parents truly get involved when right, they've got to work all day. Right. Your parents were probably a lot like mine. I didn't see my dad. He'd leave in the morning, go to work, and I'd be asleep before he'd get home at night. Right. So having him come to a PTA meeting, I mean, almost unfathomable when I was a kid. Right. How do we do some things to encourage, participation by parents who are just simply working all day?
Right. Well, I agree. It's extremely difficult, right? We have to try to work around their schedules. Some parents are working 2 jobs. Yeah. Some are single parents, so it's extremely difficult to be as engaged and involved in their child's education as they would like. Right. But I think one way to address it or attempt to address it is to provide some type of education for the parents themselves. Because okay, I remember when I decided to go to college, my mother asked me, she said, why do you want to do that? Why don't you just start working now and making money now? Right. So I had to explain to her that, I think in this country, long term, it'd be better to get a college education. So like you said, I mean, around 70% of our students are Latino descent, or of Latino descent, right? Yeah. And 42% are English as a second language learners, right? Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of students in DISD are facing the same issues that I faced as a kid. Their parents may not truly understand or appreciate the value of an education. Yeah. My grandfather, when I was the first generation to go to college, and my grandfather said, "Why is he going to school? He needs to be working, and right, hopefully he'll be back real soon." Right. Well, Wilito, it's a different time, it's a different situation. So luckily, and later in life, he kind of came to that realization. So it was kind of the reverse in terms of how he found that out. And then my parents, of course, they understand it now. They see a lot of opportunities opening up for myself, and they see that translating even down to my daughter, so.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Jaime, you're running for a trustee. Tell us a little bit about our listeners, what that includes, your district, you mentioned it earlier, Seagoville,
Yes,
PG,
yes.
and some other places. Tell us what that includes, and I believe the election is May 7th?
Yes, the election is May 7th. Again, I'm running in District 4, which includes most of Pleasant Grove up north until Sain, and the border to the left is Jim Miller, and then we also have an area south of 175 and 20. Again, most of Pleasant Grove, Balch Springs, and Seagoville. And early voting begins next week. It'll run from the 25th of April until May 3rd, and the election is May 7th.
Okay. And Jaime is given a lot with respect to his service to our country in the military. He's a very intelligent individual, and I would just encourage you guys, just across the board to look at, I can't push enough how important it is, the makeup of our board of trustees with respect to the future of our students. Having the right mentality and having the right sense of who they are and the representation is just incredible. The differences in some of the trustee races can be really close. We're talking about hundreds of votes, maybe even less in some districts. So the importance of you getting out and voting is incredible. So I would encourage you guys to look into it, especially those folks listening in Jaime's district, to get out there and vote. And regardless of rain or sleet,
Right.
Probably not sleet right now, lots of hail that we might have. I would encourage all of you guys to get out there and do that. Jaime, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming out and talking to us today. And best of luck on your run for the Board of Trustees. Once again, remember, May 7th is the actual voting date. Early voting starts this Monday, so I would encourage you guys to get out there and do it. Thank you so much for joining us this Friday afternoon. I want everybody to please have a wonderful weekend as I look out at Six Flags. Fern, is Six Flags open on the weekends now? Wonderful. We were talking about that earlier, so I'll try to head out there soon. But once again, thank you so much. Please join us every Friday from 1 to 3 on Law for the People, and you guys have a wonderful one. Thanks again.